I love to travel. I love to travel overseas. And my favorite destinations are places where Latin is not the original language. The art and the architecture is different from the United States. Books are read not from left to right, but from top to bottom. And the culture and the society and the religions and the politics are very different from what is familiar to me in my home country. So this year, in April, I fulfilled a lifelong dream of visiting China. Now, it felt like I was a time traveler in many ways. To begin with, I left the JFK airport at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and after a 13-hour flight, I landed in Beijing at 5:30 the next day. That seemed like time travel to me. But then when we went out into the city and around Beijing, it really came home to me, something I'd always known but never really experienced, and that is that China is a civilization that is 6,000 years old. Now in North America, if there's a house that's 150 years old, that's considered ancient, antique. Wow. But 6,000 years old? We visited the Forbidden City, the Secret Garden, the Great Wall of China. We saw gardens with dragons and phoenix sculptures in it. And I felt like I was really in touch with something thousands of years old. Then a few days later, we went to Shanghai, and all of a sudden, I felt like I was in the future because there were skyscrapers everywhere, tall, tall buildings with lights running up and down, odd shapes like mushrooms and flowers and blossomings. And I found out that those skyscrapers, those magnificent skyscrapers, were only 18 years old. And I began to realize that China is a nation that embraces its history and yet also embraces the future. And one way of looking at this, people would talk about the dragon lady who had been a concubine, who bore the only child who was eligible to become the ruler of China. And so until she was 70 years old, this former concubine was the dragon lady and empress of China. And then later there was Mao Zedong, and the Chinese relish him, adore him. There's paintings of him everywhere. But at the same time, China has changed so much since Chairman Mao's death that people laugh and say he would be turning over in his grave if he could see the way China runs today. Now what has changed? Well, 30 years ago, everybody in China dressed exactly alike, and everybody, no matter what their job was, made the same money. And the government told you what job to have, where to live, provided the housing, and your parents told you who to marry. There were very, very few choices. And even today, the Chinese have far fewer freedoms than we have in the United States. They can't have Facebook. If they Google, they can't use certain words like insurrection. It just ignores that. But they have many more choices than in the past. Now you can choose your own job, you can choose your own spouse, you can choose your own house, you can choose where to live. And people in China are finding this very stressful. They like the freedom, and the reason they like the freedom is because they've been watching American TV, and they see that in this country, in the United States, we get to choose all of those things. And if you work harder, you make more money, or so they think from watching TV. So the world in China is changing, and in some ways, they're an ancient world. In other ways, they're like the 1950s, where they don't wear seat belts and they don't wear helmets to ride the motorcycle. And in other ways, rest of us. I rode a high-speed magnetic train in Shanghai. Now, it went 242 miles an hour. You could take that train from Shanghai to Beijing. That drive would take 14 hours if you drove by car. If you flew by plane, it would take an hour and 50 minutes. And if you ride the train, it only takes 10 minutes longer than the flight. That's amazing. On my way back home from China, I was on the plane thinking about all that I had seen, the ancient buildings, the ancient customs, the modern buildings, the magnetic train, and I looked down at the TV screen in front of me that showed how fast the plane was going. We were up 35,000 feet in the air, going slower than that magnetic train that was on the earth. Now, one of the things that I learned is that the young people in China are a generation where every child, every young adult was an only child growing up, because that was one of China's restrictions. Families could only have one child. And as a result, every young person looking for a spouse or a roommate has been raised in a family where they never learned to share. They were adored by their family, and now all of a sudden they're trying to marry and share money, share space, share the bedroom, share the car, share the cooking, and neither of them know how to do that. And that's one of the stressful things that they're encountering by choosing their own mate. Now, they don't have Facebook, they don't have Match.com, but they do have parents who grew up in a generation where marriages were always arranged. That doesn't happen anymore, but the parents still kind of want to give their advice about who to marry. So since they don't have Facebook, the parents go to the park, they sit on a bench, they take a photograph of their daughter, they put a biography on a sheet of paper with a photograph, nail it to the tree, and sit there and wait for young men to come up and ask about their daughter. Well, who is she, and what is she like, and where does she get her health insurance, and if all of the questions are answered in a positive way, then the girl's parents and the boy's parents get together and they arrange a date, and the young people have such respect for their parents that they do go out on a date together, but they really don't consider marrying who their parents told them to marry. It's a world that is evolving, it's a world that's changing. It's a world that is very envious of the freedom that we have in this country, and also a world that's very frightened of the responsibilities that come with those freedoms. So, yes, it's a strange, strange world, and as I flew back to the United States, I thought, so is the United States a strange, strange world.